the ear mic back. We'll see how long it takes me before I break this cable, but we're going to give it a good college try and not break it. But excited to see you all this morning. I did want to, before we get too far this morning, I did want to just give you guys an important update. Some of you may or may not know, a gentleman and his wife used to attend this church by the name of Orrin Atkinson. I don't know if you all remember Orrin or know Orrin. Orrin actually had been a pastor of a church at this building in the 90s and the early 2000s. Sadly, Orrin passed away this past week. I believe it was Wednesday, he passed away. I spoke with Ernestine, his wife, and prayed with her. They'll be doing a service probably here at the building sometime in either late July or August after the crazy of summer settles down. But I did just want to take a moment to just share that announcement and also to just publicly thank Orrin and his family. Even though Orrin's health had been declining and they weren't able to join us here on Sundays, they were still big supporters and prayer warriors for what we're doing here at 317 Church. And so I always knew that Orrin was supporting what we did and just had somebody that was cheering us on and praying for us. And so we know that he's with the Lord, and so we're celebrating that and thankful for that, but did just want to let you guys know that Orrin did pass away this past week. So if you want to send condolences or anything to the family, just let me know and we can get you connected. So additionally, this morning, wanted to take a quick moment and just thank all of our givers, our donors here at 317 Church. We cannot do what we do here without your generous gift, and so I just thank you so much that you're willing to just support the work that God is doing here. I was even tallying the numbers a few weeks ago, and last year we had 6 people that made decisions for Christ here at 317 Church. And so that's an amazing thing, and we can only do that because we have people that are joining with us in partnering so that we can actually run the ministry of 317 Church. And I believe that God has amazing things ahead for 317 Church. Actually, in the coming probably the next 4 to 6 weeks, we'll actually have some exciting and encouraging and important updates that we'll be bringing about 317 Church, and so be staying tuned for those. But I did want to thank you guys for your partnership. So, alrighty, this morning, we're going to do a little Devo, wrapping up our series on By the Waters. This has been an interesting series because it is themed around times Jesus interacted with water, which, to be completely frank with you, every time I go to reintroduce the series when I preach, I go, this is kind of a boring reintroduction because it's called By the Waters, and it's literally just about stories where Jesus interacted with water. And so it's been an interesting journey on that behalf, but I think the content has been good, and we've got to learn from these, and so we're going to continue diving in and wrapping up this series today. And then actually for the next 2 weeks, our friend and brother, Pastor Neff, will be preaching. Pastor Neff will be bringing the word the next 2 weeks, and so we'll be excited to hear that. So I want to start with a question. It's not a very serious question, but it is, I think, a relatable question. How many of you have ever thought about how dangerous it is to check a single text message? Anybody? Because here's what happens. You go to check a single text message, and then you see another text message. And then you say, well, maybe I should just check my email while I'm at it. And then somehow you end up on Instagram. And then about 5 videos deep, that links you to this other random website that you're not even sure how you got to that wants to sell you 2 things for $19.99. And so there's this very interesting journey of where you started with just wanting to check a single text message, and then a half hour gets lost in the chaos of what is our phones. And so sometimes it can be dangerous for us to check a single text message because it leads us out of a simple plan and into kind of this state of chaos in our lives. And today we're going to be diving into a passage from John chapter 6, verses 16 through 21. And in this passage, we see the disciples interacting with a season of chaos in their life. It's not a very long season, like not even one whole night, but it is a season of chaos, both literally and also metaphorically. To some degree, this is almost a living parable that Jesus is leading in this passage. And so in John chapter 6, verses 16 through 21, we're going to read about Jesus walking on the water. Let's start with verse 16. That evening, Jesus' disciples went down to the shore to wait for him. But as darkness fell, Jesus still hadn't come back. So they got into the boat and headed across the lake toward Capernaum. Soon a gale swept down upon them, and the sea grew very rough. They had rowed 3 or 4 miles when suddenly they saw Jesus walking on the water toward the boat. They were terrified. But he called out to them, "Don't be afraid, I am here." Then they were eager to let him into the boat, and immediately they arrived at their destination. So what we have going on here, let me paint a picture for you a little bit of what is happening in John chapter 6. So Jesus has just finished feeding the 5,000, okay? So he's been up in the hillside around the town of Bethsaida. I can't talk this morning apparently. And so he's been around that distant fishing village, and he fed the 5,000 people. And after he fed the 5,000 people, the people actually tried to make Jesus king, okay? They want to make Jesus king. And Jesus is like, no, we're not going to do that. And so what Jesus does is he goes up into the hills, because there is a lot of kind of pseudo-mountainous areas in that region. And so he goes up into the hills to isolate himself, to get away from the crowds, and to pray. Now the disciples, okay, they did not go with him into the hills. It says that he went alone. And so they're just like hanging out down by the Sea of Galilee, which is the sea that is being talked about here. So they're hanging out by the Sea of Galilee. They know that they need to go back towards Capernaum, because that's where they had just come from in the previous chapter, in chapter 5. And so they know they need to go back towards Capernaum, but they can't find Jesus. He's just like up in the hills somewhere. And so they decide to set out on their own. So they get in the boat, they go across the lake, and they start their journey. There's an interesting thing that happens in kind of the cultural and even geographical context in this very simple explanation of what the disciples do. Because I think sometimes when we look at this story, we just read that information as like, okay, they got on a boat, good for them. Like, happy they can do that. And they got on a boat and they started rowing. Best of luck. But what we don't read explicitly, what we know from archaeological study, from geographical study, from weather patterns, is the Sea of Galilee is actually really, really known in the afternoon and in the evening for having extremely tumultuous waters. In fact, storms will actually come down upon the lake, because what is happening is the Sea of Galilee, interestingly enough, the Sea of Galilee is actually about 700 feet below sea level, okay? It is 700 feet below sea level, and all of the terrain surrounding it is like mountainous hill regions. And so what happens is this thing called the funnel effect, where cold air from the mountains will come down and interchange with the warm, moist air that's been over the lake. And late in the afternoon and in the evening, massive storms will occur. It's interesting that the disciples, who would have known this because many of them were career fishermen before Jesus picked them up, decide to go on this journey, even though they know it's highly likely that a storm will come. It's likely that they suspect that, yeah, it'll just be another storm. We've sailed through, or we've rowed through tons of these, dozens of these in our life. It'll be fine. What's even more interesting is that Jesus lets them go. I mean, if we believe, and we do, that Jesus is God and all-knowing, and he knows what will happen, he would have known that the storm that occurred that night would have been particularly rough. It would have been particularly difficult. Difficult enough to make seasoned fishermen nervous and scared for their life. And yet, Jesus allows them to go forth and go forward ahead of him. As I was studying and praying and processing for this teaching, I just kind of began to conceptualize or ask the question of, like, why did Jesus do that? Why did he let him go? Why did he not say, hey, we're actually going to stay here for the night because we don't all want to drown? And the conclusion that I came to through prayer and study is that sometimes in our lives, Jesus actually lets us walk into seasons of chaos. He lets us walk into seasons of chaos. He lets us walk into times in our lives and seasons in our lives where we don't actually know what's going to happen next, where we don't have the full picture, where it might even be something that we are experienced in, that we enjoy, or that we are even good at, that becomes so rough and so tumultuous that we begin to get fearful and stressed out. I mean, we even see this in Jesus' own life. While he doesn't become fearful or stressed out, he does become tempted. I mean, we see this right after he's baptized by John in the Jordan River. It actually says that the Spirit of God led Jesus into the wilderness. I think one of the things that has done us as Christians a disservice or led us astray is there is this old saying, you may or may not have heard it, God will never give me more than I can handle. Anybody ever heard that saying? God will never give me more than I can handle. I'm not entirely certain that that is a biblical statement, because I think what we actually see in the scriptures is that time and time again, the story of the gospel is people experiencing more than they can handle, and Jesus being the pathway or the person that scoops them out of it. It's not that Jesus made them have a bad time, but there are seasons where Jesus lets us go into seasons of chaos so that he can show up. Because if we go back to this story, if we look at what's occurring, Jesus is up in the hills, the disciples are out on a boat. It starts to get stormy. It starts to get difficult. They start to fear for their lives. And what Jesus does is he comes out of the mountains and he begins to walk on the water towards them. He begins to walk on the water towards them. I believe that in times of chaos, in times of unrest, in times of difficulty and struggle, Jesus desires to not be distant from us, but rather to draw close to us. But the question is, how will we perceive his approach? How will we perceive his approach? Will we receive his approach as, look, Jesus is near? Or will we, it doesn't, in this translation or in this gospel, it doesn't include this fact, this piece, but if you look at some of the other gospels when they tell this story, the disciples actually think that Jesus is a ghost. Now, just to reiterate the point, how rough does a storm have to be to make seasoned fishermen think there's a ghost walking on the water at them? And so when Jesus draws close, when he walks towards us in the chaos, we have to ask ourselves the question, how will we interpret or how will we respond to his approach? It's definitely easier when we respond with awareness and recognition and joy, to have his presence be at work in our lives, to know, to see where God is moving even in difficult times. But the reality is that there are often times in our lives, which is one that the disciples were walking through here, that are so tumultuous that even the most dedicated and the most grit-oriented, the most enduring, persevering people will have seasons where all they can see are the waves of life, and they struggle to see Jesus in the middle of it. I mean, it doesn't matter how long you have been or haven't been a Christian, or maybe you're not even a Christian here today. We have all had seasons in our lives where the proverbial waves of our life were so high, so tall, so rough, that all we could see was the impending doom of the next wave. That might be the wave that sinks the ship. And the beautiful thing about the gospel, about Jesus, is that regardless of how high those waves are, how difficult those seas may be, he walks towards us in the midst of those. And not only does he walk towards us, but he actually declares his authority over those waves in our life. I mean, if we look at this passage, the first thing that Jesus says, he calls out, he walks towards the boat, he calls out to them, and he says, "Do not be afraid, I am here." If there were to be a 6-word synopsis of the entirety of the gospel message, this is a pretty good contender for what God is trying to convey in the gospels and through the person of Jesus Christ. I mean, he starts with, do not be afraid, time and time again, when God intervenes, one of the things that we see is God telling the people involved in that situation, do not be afraid. Why is it, do you think, that God always kind of starts with that line when he enters into people's lives in powerful and meaningful ways? Now, you could make the simple argument, well, he's God, a celestial being, and he showed up somehow, and that was kind of freaky. You could make that argument. But I think there's also a reality at play here where God knows that because of the fall of man and sin, fear is a baseline predisposition of the human mind. It is the natural place that we go if we are not recognizing Jesus in that space. And for some of us, it might even be a reaction that we have that is almost like an instinct that is hard to control, even if we are focusing on Jesus. You might be here today, and I don't know what your week looked like. I know what mine looked like, but I don't know what yours looked like necessarily. There might be a situation in your life where the only thing you need to hear today is the Lord telling you, do not be afraid. I know that that's not terribly theologically deep, but it is really relatable. Because it is so easy in our lives to find ourselves in the middle of the Sea of Galilee, something that we feel like we should be an expert at doing, and to find ourselves instead terrified of the next thing. And the Lord shows up and he says, do not be afraid. The next thing that Jesus says to them is he says, I am here. Now, if you look at the Greek that is used here, especially in the entirety of the book of John, the Gospel of John, the Greek word that is used here is ego eimi. Okay, ego eimi. And do you know what it literally translates to? I am. Now, what is occurring here is some scholars believe, though it is debated, some scholars believe that Jesus is actually claiming his authority and claiming his lordship, his oneness with God, in his referencing back to the story of Moses, where Moses in Exodus chapter 3, verse 14, God declares to Moses, I am who I am. And in that story, as we get later on into it, we also see a miracle involving water where God uses Moses to split the Red Sea. But this time, Jesus decides to say, you know what, we've already done the splitting of the sea. Why don't this time, let's try walking on it. And what Jesus is doing here, he says, I am here. He's doing two key things. He's, first of all, reiterating his presence with us, which we've already talked about. The second thing is he is declaring himself Lord and superior to all of the things in our life that we feel overwhelmed and crushed by. I mean, I think there's this, whether it's from art or childhood stories, there's this, like, at least in my mind, incorrect picture of Jesus walking on the water, that just like the water decides to like make a water highway for Jesus to like get out to the boat. But the text doesn't actually say that. Jesus is walking over all of the same waves that the disciples are trying to use a boat, something designed for walking on the water, to get across. And Jesus, he's just taking a nice stroll. And he arrives at his destination and says, I am here. So not only does God not want you to be afraid, he also wants you to know that the chaos of your life, he is so mighty and so powerful that he has the ability to just walk right across it. At least for me, that is helpful prospectively. Because in my own life, as a person who likes to solve problems, who is naturally inclined to fix things, who is naturally inclined to be way more confident in my own ability than I probably should be, there are times in my life where I run the temptation of thinking, well, if I can't figure this out, then who can? Yes, I know it's egotistical of me, but well, that's a different teaching. If I can't figure this out, who can? If that wave is that tall that I can't actually logic and problem solve myself out of it, then that might actually be the doom that I've been fearing. But when we take time to recognize the sovereignty and authority of Jesus over things like creation and waves, that he can just waltz right on through them, at least for my own spirit, it gives me a repositioning of my focus away from the waves and more to the authority and power of Jesus Christ. I mean, a lot of times when pastors preach on this teaching, they actually preach on the portion where we see Peter try to get out of the boat and walk, and then he almost drowns. And one of the key pieces in that is Jesus tells Peter, look at me. But Peter doesn't do that. He looks at Jesus for like a minute, and then this wave comes in and slaps his feet, and then he's like, oh crap, there's a wave there. And then he starts to sink. As followers of Jesus, the great hope that we hold is Jesus' I am here in the midst of those waves. But again, the question is, how will we respond to his lordship over those things in our life? How will we respond to his ability to make them like dust in our lives? Will we be like Peter? I think many of us, myself included, we start out as Christians with great intentions like Peter did when he got out of the boat. Yes, Lord, I can do this. I'm going to look at you. Here we go. I'm locked in, laser focused. And then our focus gets distracted. We check one text message, and then there's 30 minutes of doom scrolling that happens. I wonder, in your life, what are the spaces, what are the things in your life that you have not let Jesus be the I am here of? That you have just kind of let Jesus be like a novel idea in that situation. And it's probably not explicitly or intentionally. It's probably just something that has happened almost accidentally. Where you're like, yeah, I love Jesus, follow Jesus, read my Bible, pray, go to church. But there's this one thing in my life that I've not let Jesus be the I am of. Maybe it's your job. Maybe it's money. Maybe it's broken relationships. Maybe it's your own attitude. Or maybe it's a sin. I don't know what it is for you, but I assume you do. Today, Jesus wants to be the I am here of that thing in your life. He wants to remove the waves and have you be able to just look at him. Now, does that mean the waves will go away immediately? No. But it does mean that, like Jesus, if we allow him to hold us, if we keep our focus on him, that we too can walk on the water of those waves. And I also believe that while the waves may not go away immediately, through faithful trust in the midst of the chaos, there is a time where God will help us to no longer have to even walk through those. That he will allow us to so overcome those that they are no longer affecting our lives. And there's tons of examples. It could be a situation that's just temporary. It could be a miraculous way God answers a prayer. It could be a complete change in our spirit, in our mind, in our perception of something. There are lots of ways. But I do believe that while Jesus may not bring us out of the chaos immediately, he may just help us stand above it or on it. There is a time where he will help us to fully overcome it. Because it's interesting, actually, in this verse, in verse 21, some scholars actually, as I was reading some commentaries and stuff, some scholars believe there's actually a second miracle in this story that never really gets talked about a lot. And it says this, it says, then they were eager to let him into the boat, and immediately arrived at their destination. Now, admittedly, there are some scholars that think, don't extrapolate that too much. Like they might have just been closer to the shore than they realized. But there are also some scholars, and I would align probably with these, especially because it's in the book of John, because John does a lot of metaphorical uses to help people understand the almighty power of God, of Jesus, that Jesus is like going teleport mode here in this moment. He basically just says, and we're no longer going to deal with the storm. And he brings them to their location. There are times and seasons in our life where we may not be able to see anything but the waves, but Jesus intervenes miraculously, whether through circumstances, resources, relationships, or even just our own mindset, our own mental perception, that not only helps us stand on top of the waves, but just straight up proverbially teleports us out of them. But do you know what was required for that type of miracle to occur in the lives of the disciples on that boat? Then they were eager to let him into the boat. A person that in other Gospels they had 2 verses earlier thought was a ghost. And I don't know about you, but I'm not letting any ghosts in my boat. You can let them in your boat if you want. Wouldn't recommend it, but I'm not letting any ghosts in my boat. But their perspective changes. The I am here statement has occurred. God has made himself known in the midst of that space. And they then eagerly welcome him into the boat. And so, as the band comes up and we sing one last song, the question I just want to ask you today, and honestly, as I've been preaching this message, this is even a question for myself. What is the one situation in your life that you need to eagerly welcome Jesus into? What is it? I know you've probably got it. If you don't, I need to know what juice you're drinking, because you're probably living a different life than I am. You've probably got it. A situation that the waves have just been so high, so rough, that you forgot to ask Jesus to come into the boat. It wasn't intentional. It wasn't malicious. It wasn't like, Jesus, get out of here. We don't want none of that. You just forgot. You missed it. You got so overwhelmed you didn't know where to go. Or maybe you're here today and you've never accepted Jesus and you didn't know him getting in the boat to help was an option. Wherever you are today, I would just encourage you as you go into your week, as we go into this summer season, where do you need to eagerly invite him in your life? What place, what space, what relationship, what mindset, what circumstance? Because he will help you walk on the waves, and he'll also make a path to bring you out of them. Let's stand and sing.
You stood before creation, eternity in your hands. You spoke the earth into motion, my soul now to stand. You stood before my failures, carried the cross for my shame. My sin weighed upon your shoulders, my soul now to stand. So what can I say? What can I do? Offer this heart, oh God, completely to you. So I walk upon salvation,
Jesus, as I was just standing over there and praying and singing, I just felt your Spirit encourage me to just give us a time and space here where we just quietly to ourselves pause for a moment and we just look at you and recognize that you're in this space, you're in those spaces in our lives, and eagerly invite you into that boat. And so, Jesus, in my own life, in each of our lives, in the life of our church, in those situations that we may be walking through, those relationships that might be crumbling, those scenarios that we're not sure where the path forward is, we invite you eagerly, Jesus, to come into the boat, to step into those spaces and to bring us hope and freedom, to help us overcome. Jesus, we invite you today. And we invite you, Jesus, to go with us as we go into our week. May your Holy Spirit go ahead of us and give us the courage to invite you into the boat each and every day. Jesus, we love you. We praise you. And it's in your name, Jesus, we pray. Amen.